Get more reaction on that from journalist and author Neil Clark. He joins us from London. Well, we've just been hearing that eyewitness report, yet there's been no international response to the fact that civilians are being killed in Bani Walid, especially from those states that backed the revolution in Libya a year ago. Why do you think that is?
Isn't it interesting, Bill? Let's think back to February 2011. We couldn't pick up a newspaper in the UK or the US or put on the BBC or CNN without hearing about what was going on in Libya. The humanitarian disaster, we were told. Colonel Gaddafi's forces were killing lots of people. There were dangers of a massive massacre in Benghazi. And because of that, we went to war. That was the reason for war. And today, the situation in Libya is much worse. We've got a humanitarian catastrophe taking place. The number of people killed since NATO intervened has gone up by between 10 and 20 times. We've got massacres going on at the moment, and there's silence, complete silence here in the UK and in the US.
Well, what about human rights, though? The Human Rights, that organisation, that's normally listened to, isn't it? 3 weeks on, I must say, it is 3 weeks on. The Human Rights is actually now raising its voice to what's going on there. Perhaps it could have done it a bit earlier, really. But why is that then, by all accounts, being ignored?
It tells us it all, doesn't it, Bill? I mean, Amnesty International has been very good on Libya. They've been talking about the number of detentions that have taken place there under the new regime. But of course, the Western powers aren't interested. They got what they wanted. They got rid of Gaddafi. They've got a pro-Western government in power now in Tripoli. They're taking control of the oil industry. There's privatizations. Western corporations are moving in, and they don't really give a toss, to be honest, about what's going on, about the human rights abuses, the fact that demonstrations are banned throughout the country. It's time to move on to Syria, of course.
Well, let's talk about diplomatic tensions too. On Tuesday, the US blocked Russia's diplomatic efforts in the UN Security Council to resolve that conflict peacefully in Bani Walid. Why is that?
Well, again, Russia, let's think back to what was it last October when Russia and China vetoed the very, warlike resolution from the Western powers over Syria, which would have paved the way for intervention there. And Russia and China were demonized in the Western media. Here we have Russia coming up with something very constructive, a very, very pro-peace statement, which should have been supported. And of course, the US turns it down. So I think it shows to everybody now, surely, the gross hypocrisy of the US and its allies in all of this. They use this sort of humanitarian excuses for an excuse to the humanitarian factors as an excuse to intervene militarily to topple governments which don't do the bidding of the West and Israel. They did it in Yugoslavia in 1999, they did it in Iraq, of course, they did it in Libya last year, and they're trying to do it again in Syria. But they won't be doing this in Bahrain, where there's been massive human rights abuses. They won't be doing it against Saudi Arabia, where there is no democracy, where human rights are very poor. And they won't be doing it, of course, against Israel, because, of course, we've got the situation in Gaza, described as the largest prison camp in the world. I don't think we'll be hearing from Hillary Clinton or William Hague how we've got to intervene against Israel somehow.
What about the suspicions that chemical weapons could have been used on civilians in the besieged city? We're getting some pretty clear evidence that perhaps that is the case. If it is true, any difference to an international reaction then? Surely would be stronger, wouldn't it?
Well, you would think so, but I don't think so, because, of course, any time there is any hint that Syrian government has got chemical weapons, it's front page news. It's on all the Western news channels. But, of course, RT is about the only channel that's taking up this story about chemical weapons being used here at the moment in Libya. It's just not news. Chemical weapons are only news when it's an opponent of the West that may be using them. That's it. When that happens, it's front page news, of course. And of course, they don't only have to be using them. We've got the Iraqi WMD hoax, one of the biggest conspiracy theories of all time. Saddam didn't have WMD. He didn't have those weapons, and yet it was still front page news.
Journalist, author Neil Clark joining us live there from the UK. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts.